Lewis Callaghan was thought of as a notorious gangster and dealer in the Leeds area. In spite of his wiry frame, slender build, and sullen and colourless face, Lewis was regarded as ruthless, dangerous, and a madman. He also suffered from forms of PTSD. Lewis Callaghan was part of a gang that was jailed for a combined 22 years after Yorkshire police investigated a four-man gang that had been involved in after a drug dispute. Initially, Yorkshire police had conducted an inquiry at an address linked to Lewis's brother, Lewis Callaghan, in Brther Street in Gipton. Now, that house had been swamped by armed police in the aftermath of Luke pulling out a sawn off and then his rival in the neck, back, and shoulder, leaving his victim with over 80 pellets embedded into the skin. Police had reported Luke was an enforcer for a well-known and dangerous crime gang, the MeatHeads. The 22-year-old had equipped himself with a sawn-off and then ventured off to the Harehill area of Leeds, looking for his victim, Adeel Ahmed. On August 7th of 2015, at the time of the incident, as I said, Luke had equipped himself with a sawn-off and he had hid it initially, but he had taken enough cartridges to K a small gang. Amid simmering tensions between the MeatHead gang and the rival gang that had been controlled by Adeel Ahmed, the only solution, according to Luke, was to K them. It was alleged that the tensions between the two gangs had reached a point of no return after an associate of Adeel had taken a consignment of Class A to the tune of upwards of 1 kilo. However, that debt had not been settled, and every time Luke and other associates, and even Lewis, tried to get the money back for the Class A, Adeel Ahmed and his men came up with excuses, and excuses again. Now, in the afternoon on August 5th, 2015, Luke had met up with Adeel Ahmed on Nice View. Luke and his men were armed with blades. Adeel wasn't alone, and when Luke and his associates tried to strong-arm Adeel, Luke lost the battle. Luke and his men were forced to flee. Now, what Adeel thought that he had won the ongoing scuffle and brawl, what Luke, aka MeatHead, did was he went back to an address, equipped himself with a sawn-off and the cartridges, and then went back outside. He had resolved himself to the fact that he was going to K his enemy as soon as he saw them. Now, he had sourced a BMW on fake plates and then travelled to Sandhurst Terrace. At 11:46 p.m. on the same day, Luke, who was with 3 men, stood roughly 10 feet away and then struck Adeel Ahmed with the AM, leaving 80 pellets in Adeel's chest, back, neck, and shoulder. Now, Adeel had crumpled to the ground, red dripping onto the pavement and into the road. Luke was said to have laughed, and then, for a job well done, he celebrated by taking himself and his mates to a party where they drank and then consumed more drink, and of course, they took Class A. Within 90 minutes, police were at the scene, canvassing the area and taking witness statements because they considered this to be an attempted M, even though Adeel Ahmed refused to speak to police officers. Now, police tracked other members of Luke's gang, which included his brother Lewis. Lewis Callaghan, who was only 21 years old at the time, had been travelling in a taxi, along with his associate, 19-year-old Michael Argenby. The taxi was then intercepted by armed police who forced this taxi to pull over. Now, police swooped in immediately and they opened the rear passenger side door where Lewis was sitting. Lewis was almost dragged out of the taxi and then placed in handcuffs. Police asked him if he has anything that could cause harm to them, and Lewis says no. So police began the search, and in their search, when they tapped his pocket and his jumper and swiped along both sides of his arms and both sides of his legs, police retrieved a blade and also business cards. The business cards was turned over, and when they checked the card out, it advertised the MeatHead gang and "Dr for sale," along with a dedicated mobile phone number to call. Michael, however, noticing that the police were consumed with Lewis, decided that he was going to make a break for it, and he had decamped the taxi from the rear driver's side door and then made a run for it. Now, Michael had ran as fast as his legs could take him, and in the process of running, he had launched 2 mobile phones out into the street. Those mobile phones were then retrieved by police eventually, and when police looked at the mobile phones, they noticed that the mobile screens were cracked. So the police bagged up the phones as evidence, and then they took it to the forensics. Forensics were able to look into the mobile phone and find incriminated messages. The messages had reportedly shown that a new consignment and shipment in the range of kilos had been stored at an address on Brander Street, and they were going to make a new batch. As well as the messages, police also found an account with people's names and contact numbers, as well as an amount of what each person had owned and what drug they had taken on tick and was still yet to pay. Now, armed police then obtained a search warrant, and then they made their way to Brander Street. Over a dozen officers took the front door off their hinges and made their way through the dingy house that had been rented out by 23-year-old Ophelia King. Now, she was home at the time of the incident that the police stormed in. Ophelia King was already known to police too because she had previous convictions for drug dealing and also being a courier. Now, police went through the home room by room. They were meticulous and methodical. They went through every cupboard, every drawer. They searched behind every radiator cover and behind every headrest. And they had searched behind every cushion and under every chair or sofa or bed. The search turned up £24,000 worth of Class A. That was a combination of half a kilo of white, a portion of H, and also hard white too. Police also recovered over £10,000 in cash. When forensics checked over the money, the cash had a residue that had deeply ingrained into the banknotes, which were, of course, Class A. Now, as part of the investigation, police also arrested Ophelia King's brother, who was said to be the person who cooked up the items for sale, 20-year-old Garnet King. His DNA had been found on jugs, saucepans, and also a blender that was still caked in white powder, and I'm sure you can guess what that white powder was. Now, Lewis Callaghan and Ophelia King were found guilty of 3 offences. That included possession of Class A with intent to supply. Lewis was also sentenced for other offences, which included breaching a restraining order, criminal damage, and also GBH and ABH, and he was jailed for 7 years. As for Ophelia King, she was jailed for 6 years, and as for her brother, Garnet King, he was jailed for 5 years. And Michael, who actually ran from the police, he was jailed for 4 years after they both admitted 3 offences, which included being in possession of Class A with intent to supply. Now, sadly, while serving his jail sentence, Lewis Callaghan was having a hard time adjusting to life behind a cell door. Restrictions, being confined to a small space, being told what to do, when to do it, and have to answer to prison staff proved too much for Lewis Callaghan, who was described as vulnerable within the prison system. And sadly, you can guess what he'd done next. As for his brother, Meathead, real name Luke Callaghan, he had been jailed for life for the attempted M of Adeel Ahmed, and he was serving a 30-year jail sentence. We'll discuss in the next video how Lewis ended up ending his life in jail. Condolences. Stay safe.